those of you I have not met, my name is Erik Bryn. I'm on the Ember core team. I've been lucky enough to be working on Ember and with Ember for the last almost 3 years now. And I am in the unique position where I get to actually make my living doing Ember consulting. So it's been really fun, amazing ride, and I'm really proud of what we've done with Ember, and I want to share that with you guys today, hopefully in a quick 20-minute live coding demo. So yeah, let's dive in. So what I would like us to try to build is a little like RDO-esque, since my friends here are hosting us, and I always troll them about being backbone guys and not using Ember. I figured, why don't I show them how easy it would be to build something like RDO using Ember. Yes. Unfortunately, this plan has, kind of not worked out exactly, because my old roommate and our host, Jason, no longer apparently is writing Backbone code anymore. He has switched to Erlang, which most Backbone engineers share a similar fate, I believe. Anyways, I'm here to share it with you guys instead. So here we go. So we've been working really hard on getting a great command line interface set up for you guys. If you guys are from the Node world, can you guys see this okay? If you're from the Node world, you probably have high expectations for ease of use. And so basically what we are working right now on enabling, and this is still in alpha, but basically there's an Ember command now. If you're from Rails, this will probably feel like you're at home. Ember new, Ember-RDO. So we're going to hit this, and then it's going to create our file structure that we're expecting. Ember is convention over configuration, yada, yada, yada. So then we are going to hide all the all the HTTP fetches that NPM is doing for us underneath the hood with these 3 little dots. And hopefully this will complete within 20 minutes. Can
you clear, please?
What's that? Sure. So we're installing via NPM, and of course, the Wi-Fi is going to go down or something. All right, great. And now we're installing our client-side dependencies via Bower as well. So now we've got something called Ember.RDO. I'm going to open this in Sublime. So we've got our folder structure here. And I'm going to go ahead and start the server, Ember server. Oh, God. Oh, yes, of course. I'm running another version. We're going to load this one up on port 4300. And voila. All right, great. So here we are, up and going. All right, fantastic. So what happens when we loaded up the server? We're at this page. What are we looking at? Well, if you've done server-side development, you probably imagine, well, there's some kind of application template, right? Well, guess what? You're right. So inside of app templates, we've got an application.hbs template, and here's where our H2 is coming from, right? So we're going to build RDO. So what does RDO need? Well, let's see. It's got a sidebar, right? So let's just create a sidebar real quick. We're not going to put anything in it yet. And then we're going to create a content area where we're going to put, this outlet mustache that you see is basically where the dynamic content goes, right? So we've got an application template. We're going to have a place where, depending on where we are in the application, that content for that route is going to go here. So we'll create, some kind of main class or something, right? And I don't really write CSS, so bear with me. I'm lucky I get to just write JavaScript. So here we are. We're here. We have got live reload built into the Ember CLI, so it just refreshed for us behind the scenes. Now I just want to really quickly look at the DOM. It's going to look a little ugly. Basically, we've got this div here. We can see our sidebar. We can see main, right? So we know we're working here. We're going to do the heavy rotation. For those of you who don't know, let's look at RDO real quick. There's heavy rotation here, right? And so we're going to have a bunch of albums. So let's go ahead and add a link to heavy rotation. And Ember comes with a default route called index. So just like there's an index.html, when you're dealing with static files, Ember's got an assumed index route. So we can link to index without doing anything. And we can also create an index template here. And then if we go to our app, here we are. We're in the index, right? And if we look at this link here, this link actually, Ember, since we're using this link to helper, Ember actually knows what the URL is supposed to be for this link. So it'll actually generate you an A tag with an href with the proper URL here. We'll see in a minute as we start deep linking, you'll see the href build up depending on the model data that we're actually linked as well. So anywho, so let's get our list of albums going. In preparation, decided to just go and capture some JSON from their API and basically copy and paste it in. So we've got this problem. We're like, okay, great. We need to get data from an API somehow. How do we do that? How do we get that data from a $.ajax call into a place where it's accessible by our template? Well, we've thought about this and we've decided, hey, you know what? There's this problem of async, and wouldn't it be great if there was this standard place that you could basically just return a promise, and that when that promise resolves, Ember's going to know that it can transition. So Ember does like automatic loading spinners and stuff for you, and it works like deeply nested in the UI. So if you return a promise and before it resolves, it will like tell your app to go into the loading state and show a loading spinner. We can try to get to that. I'm going to try just skip it for now. But basically, Ember's got this idea of configuration, convention over configuration. So the idea is if we've got an index, if we've got templates named things like application and index, then we're likely going to have other objects or other files named the same thing. And one of those files that's really important is the route definition. And so basically what we're going to do here is we're pasting in a bunch of JSON at the bottom here, but this is the meat of the problem here. So we're going, this by the way is using ES6 modules. Ember CLI builds in the ES6 module transpiler, so you can use the future module syntax today. I'm not going to get too into that, but basically this is kind of export defaults, kind of the equivalent of module.exports equals, so like single export. So we're exporting a subclass of Ember route, and we're returning basically data.result. So there's this JSON blob. It's got a result property with an array of albums. So this model method, or we like to refer to it as a hook, because Ember's got some default behavior. You don't actually have to implement it unless you're doing something custom, blah, blah, yada, yada, yada. Can't really talk too much about it. But basically, the model method is where you return the data from your API call. And like I said before, that can be either a synchronous return, like we are doing right here. We're just synchronously returning data that we have in memory already. This could be also something like return $.ajax. And since $.ajax returns a deferred, Ember will like hook into that deferred, and it will wait for it to resolve and do all this magical loading states for you. Yes, what's up?
Why is the route calling the model?
I'm sorry?
Why is the route calling the model? I mean,
so the idea is that you have a URL, right? And you need to, when you're fetching model data, what you're doing is you're actually deserializing some form of state of your application that's been put out to the URL, right? So the idea is like you're at album/album ID, whatever, foo, right? So this is the thing, this is the hook who's like, hey, what are the query params, or what are the parameters from the URL? I want to go fetch the data that is relevant to that area, to that part of the application.
so this is sort of a data route rather than a UI.
So throw away everything you think you know about MVC.
It's gone!
Yes. So, well said. So try not to like make judgments based on your preconceived notions of like Rails, MVC, or whatever backend MVC you have. So yeah, just we're short on time, so bear with me. And if you have questions, we can handle them at the end. So the idea is this route object is responsible for mapping URL to model data, right? And it's also kind of responsible for telling the application what it should do based on the URL changing in a way, right? So you went to the slash, you're in the application. We're going to assume that the application needs this data everywhere. And so this is the application route. We can tell that because it's application.js defined in the routes folder. And enough talking, let's look at some code working. So we are returning an array, basically, right? And what we want to do, ideally, is inside of our outlet here, inside of our index template, ideally, we would like to iterate that array, right? So inside of the template, this is going to be that array, because we're automatically going to be passing that model into the template. It's going to be the context of the template. And so now we're just going to, like, I don't know, try outputting name or something, and let's see what happens. All right, great. We've got some names. How about we output the album art? So this is a little janky. We're going to use this thing called bindatter. It's going away with this thing called HTML bars. Don't worry about it. You'll be able to just eventually say source equals icon like this, like you would with plain handlebars or mustache in general. With Ember, due to some data binding constraints, currently we have this helper that does it instead. But it's not really that big of a deal. So basically, this is going to say set source, the source attribute of the image tag, to whatever the value of icon is. Yes?
Quick question. I've been working with handlebars or with Ember for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
What I was wondering is, what's the difference between handlers that, between the helpers that have the hash in front and those that don't?
So those are called, so when you have a hash, it's called a block helper. And so the idea is here, it means that we have a block inside of it, and that we have to close it. Whereas something like link to does not have a block, it does not have a hash. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay, because I've used link to as
It has a block form as well. This is a shortcut for basically doing this.
Right. Got it.
Right? So it's the equivalent.
Got it.
All right. So I save this file. It magically reloaded. Boom, we've got album art. Cool, right? Now, what does RDO do? Well, we want to click one of these pieces of album art and go to the track listing, right? All right, great. How do we do that? Well, as you may guess, we've got this thing called link to, right? So we're going to say link to album. And we're going to pass the album because, so inside of this each here, we're iterating the array, right? So this out in this context is the array. Now we're inside of the each. The context, this inside of the each is the current iteration of the array, right? So we're saying link to the album, and we're passing this, which is the current album object, right? And just to give you guys some clarity, we've got this. Here's our array, and then here's what an album object looks like, basically, right? This whole big blob of JSON, whatever. We're using the icon thing. We're about to end up using this tracks array here, which is going to have a bunch of tracks. So, all right, link to album this. Let's close off our link to. Cool. So let's see, does it work? No, it's not going to work. Why is that? Well, because we're trying to link to something that we haven't defined as a valid route yet. So how do we do that? Well, we go to this file called router, and we've got basically, if you're familiar with Rails or some other backend things, we've got this nice little DSL. We're gonna call this thing called this.resource. It looks better in CoffeeScript. It will look better with fat arrows in ES6. Basically, we are gonna name a route called album. And we know we're navigating to a specific album, so what we're also going to do is define the dynamic segments for that URL as well. So we're going to say the URL should look like album/album ID, right? And so now you refresh, and hopefully it works. Great, it does. We've defined our album. Can you guys see the bottom here? Let me just inspect. Look at what else Ember did for us. We've got an A tag with a proper href generated for each specific album in the list. So we didn't have to do any work to do this. The nice thing as well is, like, this is not breaking the web. So if we command click one of these things, we're going to deep link to that place, right? It works just like a static website would. That's really important to us on the Ember core team. We want the web to, like, we want our JavaScript apps to behave just like server generated or static HTML apps would, right? Or not, well, not apps, but sites. So anyways, cool, we've got this thing, we can click here, but nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? Well, because we haven't defined a template yet And so we've got this naming convention thing. You know, this album name that we've provided here is now going to be the name that kind of becomes the convention for naming everything related to this, right? So what we can do is we can go just create an album template here. So we're going to create album.hbs. We're going to say, hello from an album. We refresh. We click. And it doesn't work. I know why. There's some bug I need to look into. I'm just going to do a magical incantation for a second. Something is not working correctly with this version of Ember CLI. Normally, Ember automatically generates, like, so I've been saying there's these conventions, right? Ember generates the things that you don't define yourself automatically. So the idea is you don't have to, like, add a bunch of boilerplate to a file like this. This is boilerplate that I'm adding because something broke that's causing this to not work correctly. But the idea is you don't have to implement, you don't have to define a class. Ember will code gen it for you. We call it active code generation. And you know, then you just define it when you actually need to override something, some of the default behavior that otherwise would be generated for you. So here we are, we're at albums A3751317, right? We've got our template, it's working great, awesome. So let's display some information about the album. And so there's something interesting happening here that we're about to get an error about. You might have noticed, like, navigating from that page, from the heavy rotation page directly to an album worked, but when we actually refresh or live reload decides to reload the page, it breaks. Why is that? Well, there's something interesting going on here that Ember does for you. And the idea is, when we call link to, we're actually passing the model object to that route for you, right? So the idea is, ideally, if you already have the album data, why would you go make an AJAX call to get it again from that route, right? You don't need to. We already have it. But what happens is when you're at this route and you refresh the page, or you're sharing a link with somebody and they're navigating directly to this page, well, we don't have that album data loaded already because you didn't come from that path previously, right? So the TLDR is we need to help Ember understand how to fetch this album. Now, the cool thing is that if you use one of the, like, Ember data libraries, such as Ember Data or my version of it, Ember Model, you actually get this really cool and crazy default behavior where we're like, we actually look at the dynamic segment and we're like, it's album ID. So we're going to look for, like, the album model, and we're going to automatically find that for you by the ID in the URL. But since we're starting simple and we're not using a data library like that or anything, we're just going to implement it ourselves. And as you may guess, the place we need to implement this is the album route, right? Because we're going directly to an album, and we need that album route, its corresponding album route, to load that data.
How did you generate the links in the first place? Did it auto look up the ID
link
of the
to?
album?
Yes. So there's a convention for how models have, like, basically it expects models to have an ID property, and that's customizable. So if your models are special, or you don't want to munge them to, you know, be like the convention Ember expects, there's hooks that you can override called serialize and deserialize that basically get the model object, and then you return basically the ID that you know, from the model. So yeah, that's how it works. It's just, we've agreed that, like, seems good that an ID property is the place you put that, and because you agreed to that convention, now links just work automatically. You don't have to do anything fancy. So, you know what? We just realized that something broke. This seems bad. We should probably write some tests or something, right? This is probably not going to work. Let's do it anyways. All right, let's write a unit test for this. Oh my God. Let's actually cheat a little bit, because I wrote this before, like a minute ago, before I got up here. So let me just steal my boilerplate a little bit. All right, so we want to write an integration test that basically exercises the application. And the cool thing about this is that they run in the browser. So we don't actually need any like infrastructure or CLI stuff. We actually run them in the browser for you. So let's try doing this. This is not going to totally work, is it? All right, let's see. Cool. Oh, great. CSS is broken. Seems good. Let me fix that real quick. I think this is just a quick hack. There's something wrong with the load path. Alpha software, people. Live coding with alpha software. Could you have done anything stupider, Erik? Yes. Yes, I can. And maybe I will still. All right. So cool. We've got this thing running. It failed for some mysterious reason. Let's find out why. So let's just, I don't know why it failed, actually. Why did it fail? OK, expect 1. OK, true. All right, cool. So now let's real quick, let's just like see if we can make this do something cool. So you might be able to see like this little window here is actually like where the app gets rendered while tests run. So if you set breakpoints and stuff, you can actually see, you can like stop the application, inspect the state of it. You can actually interact with it. The application is literally rendering into like a div that is 50% zoomed. It's kind of cool. So we're going to visit. So basically the idea is if you've ever used Capybara or something like that, this is kind of like that. There's kind of like a little DSL for writing these tests. So we're going to navigate to an album, but we know that like navigating to an album, how bad are we on time? 5 minutes? Holy shit. All right. Abort. So we're not going to write tests because we're cowboys here, right? So all right, let's do some cool stuff. Actually, you know what? Let's stop writing code. We only got 5 minutes. Let me walk you through the code that I wrote like 10 minutes ago, so that we can see some of the cool stuff that we were able to do with not much code. So I guess real quick, this is what tests look like. You're like, OK, I want to navigate to an item. Well, visit this URL, click some selector, right? And then when all the async finishes, this is kind of crazy. It actually abstracts async from you. You are writing a synchronous looking test, and it actually completely deals with async, AJAX, everything for you underneath the hood. You don't have to care about it. And so basically you're like visit / click a button. You know, this is basically clicking an album, and then we're just saying, OK, there's an H1 that contains Frozen. Sounds good, right? Then this is Ember Testing, which is a framework that I wrote. It's built on top of QUnit. It's basically a set of helpers for QUnit, and it actually has adapters for Mocha, Jasmine, etc. So you can use whatever you want, but I recommend if you're going to build an Ember app, you should use QUnit. If you want BDD style testing, you should use QUnit BDD, which my good friend Brian Donovan over at Square wrote. It's awesome. If you like Mocha or Expect.js, like you're going to like QUnit BDD. Anyways, that stuff said, let's get back into the app code. So let's just look ahead at what we built. So I'm going to refresh this. Oh yeah, I guess I can just show you the test real quick too. Like, they run really fast. Actually, the slowest thing about running these tests right now is like I'm actually waiting for the Rdio API to respond. So like it's actually talking to Rdio live for playing music and stuff. So we're going to get to that. So we click Frozen. Great. We've got all these like play buttons and stuff, right? And we got links to a specific track, right? We've got this little buy button here that doesn't really do anything. Let's look at the code for this stuff. So we were about to implement an album route. And basically what we were going to do is we were going to say, oh, well, we already loaded all the data in the application route, so let's go get the model for that. We know that model is going to be, from the application route, is going to be all the albums, right? And then we're just going to use this like array convenience method called findBy, and we're just going to basically say, find the element in this album with the ID that matches the album ID params, right, which comes from the URL. And then inside of the album template, we're going to just like loop over all the tracks from that array. And then we're doing something really cool here. This originally was, we were going to walk through, we were just going to link to a track. And then we were going to see this page, which basically was just doing some dumb little HTML stuff. Then we were going to build this thing, we were going to build a web component like called Audio Player. And so what this was going to do was be this isolated, reusable thing that we could drop into any other application. And basically the only thing that Audio Player needs to do its job is the track ID of the song we want it to play. And so let's just look at that really quick because it's cool. So this little play button here, right, and this time is the Audio Player rendering. So let's look at what the Audio Player template looks like. So basically, we had that if we were building this from scratch, we'd start off with a couple buttons here for play and pause, and then this thing, this mustache, which is using this helper we would have also wrote if we had more time, called format time. And so format time, just to give you, it's some stupid logic. It takes seconds in and it creates a string. This is probably garbage logic, but basically it creates like a zero padded time, right, like you would want. So we're using that to format the time. We're going to have a play button that when we click it, it's going to trigger a play action on our component. And so our component definition has this action called play. And basically, this is where like you can imagine like this is where jQuery, or in this case, RDO's JavaScript API, it's just a script tag that I dropped in to the HTML. Basically, it exposes this global r.player.play. And so I can pass in here the track ID. And the track ID is what we got from our usage of the component inside of the template, right? So we passed in track ID inside of the object definition. This is like a view definition you could imagine in Backbone, or I don't know what you call them. Maybe they're controllers. I have no idea. I think they're views. So we're saying, oh, the track ID, great. We're going to pass that in as the source. And then we're going to toggle this property called isPlaying. And the cool thing about that toggle there is that this is going to change the button that's displayed, right? So when we toggle isPlaying from false to true, we're going to go from a play button that plays a song from RDO's API. And when we hit pause, we're going to set that toggle back and stop playing it as well. So just to show you, that we're just basically calling r.player.pause, nothing fancy. There's also like a little event listener here that's triggering, that's basically helping us keep track of what the current time is as reported by the RDO player. What else? I don't know. Let's see. That might be just as good a time as any to wrap things up. Yep.
The module definition at the top of the RDO player.js?
Yeah, for sure. So, so here we are. We're exporting. We've got a single export, and we're exporting a subclass of Ember component. And so basically all we're doing here is we're saying like we expect, this is kind of documentation and default value specification, right? So we're expecting a track ID to be passed in. We're setting the default value of isPlaying to be false. We're setting the current time to null. And then we've got a method called player position changed. We've got this actions hash, which from the template is basically the place where we can define these actions here that we can call. So that on default this is like on click here. And so when we click this button, we're going to call play inside of our component. We're also going to do some cleanup here, like when the element gets pulled out of the DOM, we're going to destroy the event handler that we had set up previously, in case we didn't pause after playing, right? So yeah, any other questions? I guess I'll just answer questions while yeah.
So, having played with Ember a few times,
yeah.
The biggest pain point is still the CLI tools.
Yeah.
And just structure, like starting out with
yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
Just how alpha are we talking about? I mean, I know.
Well, I will tell you how alpha. I spent most of my time preparing, banging my head against getting Ember CLI working. So, so it actually works if you check out the master. Like if you check out Ember CLI master, it works. Apparently, like a dependency changed of Ember CLI, which had a deprecation and that caused it to break. So basically, it's like alpha software layered on top of alpha software. So that's the level of expectation that you should have playing with it. The idea, though, is that within the next several months, this is going to be stable, and eventually, instead of when you go to Ember.js.com, getting a big button that says download a starter kit, which is a zip of like static HTML that requires you to not be able to use, it doesn't have a build system that compiles your templates for you and all this stuff. Instead of that, you're going to see npm install ember-cli, right? And who knows, maybe we'll even have our own like Ember binary that embeds Node so that you don't even have to install Node first, right? So yeah, we just want to make things as dead simple as possible. Part of the problem with, the reason why there's not a CLI story right now is that we wanted to focus on the actual Ember project itself, not build tools, right? And so it actually turned out that we ended up having to we've waited long enough. It's actually to a point where people are like you are saying, hey, I want to try Ember, but it's so hard to get started. There's 10 different ways of doing it because there's 10 different ways of doing JavaScript client-side apps. What's the easy way that is supported, right? So my first experience with Ember is not like banging my head around getting a build system set up. Instead, it's banging my head on the learning curve. And if you find yourself banging your head on the learning curve, good news. I've got a training class coming up on May 1st and May 2nd. King of segues. So that said, we're doing it in San Francisco, Chicago, New York. You can check out my website, erikbryn.com, if you have any questions. I should wrap up, though, probably.
Maybe one more question?
Yeah. Hey.
How do I get started with the testing framework? Does it come with
Yes,
Ember?
so great news. It comes with Ember, and we now just documented the hell out of it. So if you go to the testing guide here, boom, this all landed like a week ago. So enjoy. There is a treasure trove of information here. If you have any questions or you have trouble in general, you want to play with Ember, you're trying to get it figured out, feel free to email or tweet at me. I want to know what the things that the problems people are running into, if you are running into problems. So please let me know because we're always trying to make things better so that we can all build better apps faster. All right, thanks, guys.